I sewed my daughter's wedding gown in a single night. I never closed my eyes, never stretched my back, never even made myself a cup of tea. Just me, the needle, and the old machine humming like a tired heart. Every stitch felt like a memory, every thread a promise. The clock on the wall kept shouting the hours at me with its steady tick-tock, as if it were counting down not just the night, but my life itself. By the time the first ray of sun crept in through the thin curtains, the dress lay across my lap like a sleeping angel. The light fell over the white fabric, soft and patient, and for a moment the world was quiet. It wasn't a designer gown from Fifth Avenue, and it didn't carry a famous name on its label, but it carried mine. It carried my love and the tired courage of a mother who still believed that care, real care, could heal any distance. My hands trembled as I wrapped it in an old but clean sheet. I held it to my chest the way I used to hold my daughter when she was a baby and thought, this is it. This is what all the years have been for. When I arrived at Zuri's house, the smell of fresh coffee and expensive perfume floated in the air. Laughter spilled from the living room. Her friends were gathered around her, pretty and polished, sipping from delicate cups, legs crossed just so, like women in a magazine. Zuri sat in the middle, radiant, already half a bride. For a second my heart swelled. That's my girl, I thought, my little girl. She looked up and saw me standing there in my worn dress and old shoes, holding the sheet bundle like a fragile relic. Is that the dress? She asked. I nodded, my smile trembling with pride. I walked closer and began to unwrap it slowly, as if I were unveiling a treasure. The gown unfurled, the lace catching a sliver of sunlight. She looked at it for barely 3 seconds. This looks like something a poor person would wear, she said, her lip curling. Her friends giggled behind their cups. Before I could speak, she snatched the gown from my hands and tossed it into the trash can like it was nothing but a dirty rag. I'm not getting married dressed like a seamstress, Mom. The room went quiet, not out of respect, but out of discomfort. No one looked at me. My lungs forgot how to work. I stood there, holding nothing, my hands still frozen in the shape of the dress that was no longer there. I didn't say a word. I gathered what was left of my pride, keeping my eyes on the floor so no one would see my tears, and I walked out as slowly as I could. Outside, the sun was blazing, but I felt cold. The world seemed too bright, too loud, too sharp. On the walk home, all I could see was the dress. Every stitch burned like a small betrayal. I thought of the countless nights spent at my mother's old machine, the needles that had pierced my fingers, the calluses that had grown where softness used to live. I thought of every sacrifice I had sewn into the seams of my daughter's life. School uniforms, festival dresses, winter coats, all the things I had made so Zuri could step into rooms where I would never be invited, and I wondered, when did love become something to be ashamed of? When I reached home, I went straight to my sewing table. The machine sat there, silent, its chipped paint and worn metal as familiar as my own hands. I placed my fingers on the pedal and listened to the quiet. Once, its whir had been the rhythm of my days. Now, even in its silence, it sounded like a lament. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't just pain. Pain I knew well. This was something colder, calmer. The kind of calm that comes when a heart doesn't break apart, but hardens sharp and clear. A calm that doesn't cry. A calm that begins to think. Days went by. Zuri didn't call, not to apologize, not even to ask if I was coming to the wedding. I heard through neighbors that her designer gown had arrived from Paris. People whispered about it as if it were a royal garment. Lace from some old European house, handmade, they said. Perfect, but perfection, I've learned, is often empty. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't remember who paid for it. One afternoon, I walked back to her house. I waited until I saw her leave in a car, laughing with a friend, hair shining, lips painted the color of ripe cherries. When the street was quiet, I slipped in with the spare key I'd had since she moved out and never bothered to change. The house smelled like roses and luxury shampoo. Everything was polished, bright, and carefully placed. as if nothing bad had ever happened there. I went straight to the small trash bin near the back room, half hoping, half dreading. There it was, my gown, crumpled, stained, abandoned beneath paper and scraps of fabric, humiliated, forgotten, but whole. Just like me, I lifted it carefully, as if it could still shatter. I pressed it against my chest and held it there, breathing into the fabric as if I could give it back its soul. At home, I laid it across my work table and let the sunset fall over it. Even wrinkled and stained, it was beautiful in a tired sort of way, like a mother who has been hurt but still loves. I ran my hands along the seams and felt something pulsing there, my love, trapped in every line of thread. I knew then this dress was not going to die in a garbage can. That night, I turned on my machine. For days, I sewed as if I were in a trance. I barely slept. I barely ate. I only stitched. I washed the fabric gently, pressed it, and began to transform it. I added small crystal flowers along the hem, each one like a captured tear. I found a piece of vintage lace I had been saving for a special client, and realized it had always been meant for me. I reinforced the bodice, reshaped the neckline, and strengthened the hidden seams. And beneath those layers, I wove something else. I stitched in my story. One stitch for every night I had gone to bed hungry so Zuri could eat well. One thread for every time I'd walked instead of taking the bus, so she could have the right shoes for school. One tiny embroidered flower for every day I felt invisible in places where she shone. As the dress changed, so did I. The hunch in my back slowly straightened. My hands, though still rough, moved with new certainty. I was no longer just a seamstress bending under my daughter's contempt. I was a woman waking up inside her own skin. When the last bead was sewn, I stood in front of the mirror with the dress hanging beside me. The light from the small lamp caught the crystals and the gown shimmered softly. My reflection did not look sad. I saw a firmness in my eyes I hadn't seen for years. The gown was more than beautiful. It was an answer. The wedding day arrived under a gray, heavy sky. The air tasted like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I hadn't planned to go. After all, I hadn't been properly invited. But sometimes dignity whispers louder than hurt. I put on my one good cream dress, fixed my hair as best I could, and picked up the garment bag that carried the transformed gown, not as a gift, as a mirror. The Grand Magnolia Ballroom in Charlotte was dressed like a dream. Golden pillars, cascading flowers, glasses catching the light like crystals. People laughed and posed for photos, their lives gleaming for the cameras. I lingered near the entrance, almost invisible. Zuri floated in the center of the room in her imported gown. She looked stunning, like something out of a bridal magazine. But when I looked at her, I saw only distance and a hollow shine. Beauty without memory. She didn't notice me. I watched from the side as guests surrounded her, congratulating her, admiring the lace that had never known a mother's hand. A woman I recognized as the groom's mother approached me with a polished smile. "You must be Zuri's mother," she said, her eyes scanning me quickly. I nodded. "How lovely," she replied, though nothing in her tone matched the word. "We're about to take family pictures. Would you mind waiting? Perhaps toward the back?" She motioned vaguely toward a corner near the curtains. I stepped aside obediently, as I had my whole life. To many people in that ballroom, I wasn't a mother. I was just a background. During the ceremony, Zuri never looked my way. She didn't introduce me to anyone. I was there and not there, a ghost in sensible shoes. They danced their first dance. Guests clapped, glasses clinked, music swelled. I clapped too, my hands shaking, but not from joy. It was rage, not the wild kind. The cold one, the kind that stands up slowly and chooses its moment. Near midnight, when the music was loud and people's tongues loose with drink, I rose from my chair. I felt my heart beating, steady as the machine pedal under my foot. I walked toward the center of the ballroom with the garment bag in my hands. At first, no one noticed. Then the murmur began. One by one, conversations cut off, heads turned, forks paused midair. The DJ lowered the music, confused. Zuri looked up, her laughter dying on her lips when she saw me. "Mom, what are you doing?" She hissed through clenched teeth as I moved closer. I stopped a few steps away from her, close enough so she could see the calm in my face. "I came to collect something that belongs to me," I said. I unzipped the garment bag. The dress emerged like a secret, finally ready to be told. Under the ballroom lights, the crystals and lace caught fire. Gasps rose around us. It was the same gown she had thrown away, but now it looked like royalty. Zuri's eyes widened. Color drained from her cheeks. "W. What is that?" she whispered. "Your first wedding dress." I replied softly. "The one you said looked like something a poor person would wear." Her lips trembled. "But it's beautiful." "Yes," I said, "because I finished it for me." I turned to the crowd, not because I wanted an audience, but because I refused to hide any more. "This dress," I said, holding it out so they could all see it, "wasn't sewn with money. It was sewn with nights I didn't sleep, with years I refused to give up, even when life tried to unthread me. Every stitch carries my story. Every seam knows my name." No one spoke. Zuri covered her face, her shoulders shaking. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Stop." "No, daughter," I said gently. "I stopped speaking a long time ago. Today I begin again." Someone started to clap. Then another, and another. Soon the entire room was applauding. Not for a designer, not for a wealthy bride, for me, for a tired woman with calloused hands and a dress shining like dignity, finally recognized. I looked at Zuri, not with anger, not with triumph, just with a strange, soft sadness. I cupped her face in my hands and whispered, "There is no shame in being humble, Zuri. The shame is in forgetting who held you up before the world knew your name." She sobbed, trying to hug me, but I stepped back. "Not yet," I said quietly. "First, you must learn what it truly means to love." I turned and walked out, the dress over my arm, the applause washing over my back like a wave. Outside, the night was cooler. The moon cast a pale light over the lace, making it glow with a gentle, almost otherworldly radiance. I walked home slowly, each step a stitch closing a wound. I did not cry. My tears had already been spent long ago. At home, I hung the dress where I could see it. For the world, it was just fabric and beads. For me, it was proof that a woman can gather herself from the trash and turn herself into something unthrowable. What no one knew, not even Zuri, was that inside that dress, hidden between layers of tulle and lining, there were secrets. The night I rescued it from the trash, I didn't only wash and decorate it. I opened the seams and slid in small folded notes. Tiny paper hearts sewn into the lining. On one note I wrote, "When you were born, I thought life had given me back everything it had taken away. I never imagined love could hurt most when it is given without measure." On another, I sewed your first dress out of leftover fabric, but my hands were full of hope. I didn't know you would one day be ashamed of the love that clothed you. On the smallest one, a sentence from my mother. The thread between a mother and daughter never breaks. It only stretches until one of them learns to let go. I didn't know if Zuri would ever find them. I only knew I had to leave my words somewhere she couldn't throw away as easily as a dress. 3 days after the wedding, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Zuri stood there, no makeup, hair unstyled, the skin under her eyes swollen. She held the gown in her hands. "Mom," she said in a small voice I hadn't heard since she was a child, "can we talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. The house seemed to recognize her scent, the way the walls sometimes remember laughter. She placed the gown on the table, her fingers lingering on the lace. I opened it. She said, "I know," I replied quietly. "I found your letters." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I had no idea. Everything you did, everything you sacrificed." You weren't supposed to know. I said, mothers don't count stitches, we just sew. She knelt in front of me, just like she used to when she scraped her knee as a girl. I was so cruel. She whispered, so ashamed of you, of us, can you forgive me? Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't erase pain. It simply sits beside it and takes its hand. You don't need my permission to become better. I told her, you only need to learn and keep learning. She rested her head on my lap, and for a moment it was like time folded, like I had my little girl back in my arms. Later that week, another woman came knocking on my door, the groom's mother. Her name was Amani Ellington. That night at the wedding she had looked at me like I was beneath her shoes. Now she stood at my threshold with flowers in her hands and a tremor in her voice. May I come in? She asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We sat at the table like people who have shared a secret they don't fully understand yet. She fidgeted with her rings, her perfume drifting through the quiet room. I suppose you remember me from many years ago. She began carefully. I looked at her more closely. Her face, though older, stirred something in my memory. Gold bracelets, sharp words, a shop that smelled of starch and dust. I was a girl then, she said, rich, arrogant, and unkind. My mother had a seamstress who worked miracles for almost nothing. I treated her badly, shouted over a missed button, delayed her pay. Sometimes I didn't pay her at all. She swallowed hard. That seamstress was you. The old tailor shop flashed before my eyes, the narrow back room, the expensive fabrics I never got to wear, the young lady who had once called me just help and waved me away like smoke. You fired me without my wages. I said calmly, I did. She whispered, and I have carried that guilt for decades. The room was very still. I saw you at the wedding, she continued. At first I pretended not to recognize you, but when you walked into that ballroom with that dress, with that dignity, I knew I had to come here, not out of pity, but because I realized I have spent my life rich in everything but the one thing you have in abundance, honor. She slid an envelope across the table. I want to help you open your own studio, she said, a place where your hands can be seen for what they are, extraordinary. I stared at the envelope. My first instinct was to push it back. Forgiveness cannot be bought. But I also thought of my mother's words. Women like us don't have swords or fortunes. Our strength is in what we build for others. If this studio is to exist, I said slowly, it will not be as your apology. It will be as my beginning. She nodded. Name it whatever you wish. I didn't hesitate, Hope. I said, my mother's name. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of paint, dust, and measuring tapes. Zuri moved in with me for a while. We cleaned together, cooked together, sat together in the evenings saying the things we had swallowed for too long. Some conversations hurt, some healed, all were necessary. One morning, as we were sorting old boxes from my former workplace, I found a small package wrapped in paper, so yellowed it looked like forgotten sunlight. It had my name written on it in a familiar, slanting hand. Kofi, my late husband. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a faded notebook and a short letter. Afia, it began, if this ever reaches you, it means life did not give me the time I hoped for. I failed you in many ways, but there are two things I want to leave behind. A little money I managed to save honestly, and the truth that I was always prouder of your stitches than of my own hands. Near the end, he wrote something that swallowed the breath from my lungs. If you ever feel alone, look for the red thread. I kept it, the first thread you used on Zuri's baby dress. It reminded me of why everything was worth it. For hours, Zuri and I searched through my old fabric drawers until finally, at the bottom of a box of remnants, we found it. A single spool of red thread, old but strong, unbroken. I held it between my fingers and felt as if I were holding the past itself, fragile but still intact. When the studio opened, I framed a small length of that thread and hung it by the door. Under it, I wrote, in this place we mend more than fabric. Hope Studio became a haven for women like me, widows, single mothers, girls who had been told they had no talent, women tired of depending on the moods and money of others. They came with torn clothes and invisible wounds. I taught them what my mother taught me, how to thread a needle, how to press a seam, how to sit with pain until it turns into patience. Zuri stood by my side, apron on, pricking her fingers and laughing at her own clumsiness. She never again called me mother, with that cold distance. She called me mama, the way she had when she was small. Sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she would touch the framed red thread and smile. Years passed, my hair turned completely white. My hands gathered new scars, thin and shiny like silver threads. Zuri had a daughter of her own, a bright child with curious eyes and quick fingers. Her name was Nia. One afternoon, Nia found a loose piece of red thread in the studio. She wrapped it around her small wrist and ran to me. "Grandma," she said, "can I keep this?" I looked at the thread glowing against her brown skin and felt my throat tighten. "Yes, my love," I said, "but you must promise to take care of it." "Why?" she asked. "Because in this family, red thread is what we use to sew the things we can't see." "Like what?" "Like courage," I smiled. "And forgiveness." She nodded seriously, though I knew she didn't fully understand yet. One day she will. Maybe on the day her own heart tears for the first time and she needs something small but strong to hold on to. Hope Studio grew. People from other neighborhoods started bringing their wedding dresses, their celebration outfits, their most precious garments, not for fashion, for blessing. They said there was something different in the clothes we made, as if the seams carried prayers. Maybe they did. One evening, I received a letter from a women's organization I had never heard of. They had heard about the studio, about the women who had learned to rebuild their lives there, about the old seamstress who once walked into a ballroom holding a gown like a sword made of lace. They wanted to give me an award. At the ceremony, I stood in front of a room full of women whose eyes carried stories like mine. I wore my cream dress once again, the same one I had worn to my mother's funeral, to my daughter's wedding, and to my first day opening the studio. "I am just a seamstress," I told them, "but I have learned this. No fabric is beyond repair if you are willing to touch it with patience. No life is beyond mending if you hold it with honest hands. And the firmest stitches are always made with threads that have known tears." They stood up and clapped, some wiping their cheeks discreetly. Among them, I saw a Manny, older now, her posture softer. She had helped us with the studio, and in time, had become almost like family. We had learned to speak to each other as two women who had both been wrong and right in different ways. Later, illness took her, as it takes many. She left a small inheritance to Hope Studio, not nearly as grand as her early life had been, but more than enough to keep the doors open long after I'm gone. On a small note, written in trembling handwriting, she left me one last message. "Thank you for sewing what my pride once tore apart." Now, when I sit in my rocking chair by the studio window, I watch Nia and Zuri working side by side. Nia's hands still fumble with the needle. Sometimes she pricks herself and yelps, and Zuri laughs, kissing her finger better. The afternoon light spills over them like a quiet blessing. I look at my own hands, wrinkled, veined, crossed with tiny pale scars. They tell the story of everything I have been: wife, widow, mother, seamstress, teacher. They have sewn hunger into strength, shame into lessons, rejection into freedom. If you asked me whether I would live it all again, the humiliation, the tears, the long nights alone under the dull light of a single bulb, I would answer without hesitation. Yes, because every wound taught me to hold the needle more firmly. Every cruel word reminded me that dignity is the only garment that must never be taken off. Every dress I sewed brought me one step closer to the woman I was always meant to be. The red thread still hangs on the wall of Hope Studio. Some days, when I am very tired, I run my fingers along the glass and think of my mother, of Kofi, of Zuri, of Nia. Of all the women who have passed through these doors with broken pieces of their lives folded in their hands, we stitch them together, not perfectly, not without scars, but strong. Soon I know my own hands will have to rest. Someone else will oil the machine. Someone else will thread the needles. Someone else will answer the knock at the door from a girl who thinks an old fabric cannot be beautiful again. I am not afraid, because somewhere in this city there will always be a woman holding a piece of red thread she doesn't fully understand yet. And one day when the world makes her feel small, she will remember a story about a dress in a trash can, a mother in a ballroom, and a love that refused to be thrown away, and she will pick up the needle. And she will begin to sew,